We're going to begin, however, with the fallout here in Washington after President Biden marked the first year of his presidency with a marathon press conference yesterday. He talked about his stalled agenda, the COVID response the federal government is undertaking, and what might be ahead in year two on the domestic and international front. ABC News senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the highlights from the press conference.
President Biden conceding he has to break up his sweeping agenda if he hopes to get anything done.
Is there anything that you are confident you can get signed into law before the midterm elections?
Yes, I'm confident we can get pieces, big chunks of the Build Back Better law signed into law.
The president eventually acknowledging he will have to settle for smaller victories and push for parts of his massive social spending bill.
I think we can break the package up, get as much as we can now, and come back and fight for the rest later.
And as tensions with Russia rise, the president making news, predicting Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine. But Biden raising questions over how the U.S. and European allies will respond.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia.
George pressing Vice President Kamala Harris.
So any movement of Russian forces into Ukraine, into any part of Ukraine, even if it's not a full-scale invasion of Kiev, will be met by severe sanction and perhaps a military response?
We will interpret any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity by Russia and Vladimir Putin as an aggressive action, and it will be met with costs, severe and certain.
Well, the administration sent out a lot of people, thanks to Mary Bruce for that report, to clean up on various subjects after that marathon press conference by the president. We just saw Vice President Kamala Harris there. White House playing cleanup after the president's suggestion that the U.S. and its allies might disagree about how to address a, quote, minor incursion. That's the way the president put it. He said, you know, if there's a minor incursion, maybe we will respond differently by Russia in Ukraine. So how were his comments received overseas? ABC News senior foreign correspondent Ian Pennell joins us with that.
Yeah, hi, Terry. I think two types of reaction. The official on-the-record reaction tends to be one, certainly from the Ukrainians, of saying, oh, well, we don't think Biden is saying anything different to what we're saying, and he didn't necessarily mean that. In other words, taking the talking points that the White House issued shortly after Biden stopped speaking to say, well, he was talking in terms of a minor incursion about maybe something like a cyber attack. However, an advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky telling ABC News there's shock and dismay about Biden's comments, and that does reflect, I think, a wider mood of concern, not just here in Ukraine, but elsewhere in Europe. One senior Ukrainian military source telling ABC News it is so frustrating. And I think all of this is going to make Secretary of State Blinken's job as he meets other European foreign ministers in Berlin all the harder. He's trying to forge some kind of unity. And President Biden, of course, nodding to the fact that there isn't unity there in terms of what Europe, what NATO would do in the eventuality of some kind of Russian invasion or incursion. There was almost like a shopping list that if there's a small incursion, which of course is invasion by another name, then the response will be limited or difficult. If it's much larger, a big-scale invasion, then perhaps there'll be more unity. And that is a challenge for Secretary of State Blinken. They're trying to send a strong message to Moscow because Moscow is watching this division, watching Biden's address and his press conference, and of course that provides them with some comfort. Russia, of course, has been adding more and more forces and equipment to the border areas over the last week, but over the last few months as well, 100,000 or so, more arriving in Belarus. Over the last week for war games, again, Russia says this is just planned, this is normal. Washington is saying this isn't normal. You wouldn't deploy those kind of weapons, that kind of force. Terry?
Ian Pennell, thanks very much on the tense situation there in Ukraine. So on the domestic front, as Mary Bruce was reporting, President Biden now says he'll try to break his signature social spending bill into smaller pieces, and he's urging patience with the public when it comes to COVID testing and addressing inflation. So what can we expect from year two of the Biden presidency? And joining us to discuss that, former Democratic Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, former Trump administration official Sarah Isgur. Both are ABC News contributors. Glad to see you both again here. And Senator, let me begin with you. at this 1 year mark. We heard what the president made of what's happened and what he hopes is going to happen. What were your main takeaways from that press conference?
Well, the main takeaway is that he is no longer going to wait around for Congress to negotiate and to finalize this package, that he is going to be taking the reins and deciding what can happen and what can't happen. You know, it's interesting because he needs Congress and he still needs those senators to advance something in reconciliation. I expect that it's not just going to be what are the Joe Biden priorities, but it's going to be what are the Michael Bennet priorities and the Mark Warner priorities, and maybe some of those moderates that have been sitting off to the side that haven't had as visible of a role in trying to negotiate this package. So I expect that what you're going to see is a package coming up through reconciliation that has a 10-year pay for. I think that if they can satisfy Manchin, everybody hopes that Sinema will go along. And then there will be an all-out, I think, very aggressive media campaign to talk about the things that the Democrats believe in and that they've done and the things that the Republicans have tried to stop, especially in those all-important 2022 states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin.
And Republicans, as he pointed out, really, he thinks right now is offering nothing. Mitch McConnell, when asked, he said this election is going to be all about the Democrats. So, Sarah, on that there was something that struck me that the president said yesterday when he was asked point blank if the voting rights bill fails, which it did last night in the Senate, can Americans trust that the midterm election will be reliable, that they can trust the election results? And he said, well, it depends. He said, it could be legitimate, maybe not. He kind of waffled all over that. Now, we've already got President Trump, former President Trump, out there telling his voters, vandalizing the democracy basically every day, saying, you can't trust anything. Like, now we've got President Biden there. They try to do some cleanup after that as well. But how damaging is this with the two leaders of the parties essentially signaling to their voters, either explicitly or bumbling into it, that we can't trust our own democracy anymore?
Huge problem. And not only, as you said, it's actually a problem for our form of self-government, but it also lost Democrats the high road on this. After a year of Donald Trump calling into question our elections and Democrats saying, hey, that's not right, you now have the president of their party, the president of the country, calling into question the same thing when he doesn't get what he wants. I also thought it was interesting, when he said that, he didn't call Mitt Romney, he didn't call any Republicans about this voter legislation because he wanted to get his people in a row. But that's not what he was saying a week ago in Atlanta. He was saying that Republicans were like Bull Connor. And when he was asked that multiple times to see if he wanted to clean up the George Wallace, the Jefferson Davis comparisons, he declined and just said, that's not what I said. You guys need to learn to read better. Kudos to him for having a 2-hour press conference, but huge damage, not just on the foreign policy front, but I heard exactly what you heard, which is a huge problem here at home when you tell your voters they can't trust the election unless you win.
It does seem like both sides now have arguments as to why the results of our election shouldn't be trusted. Now, Heidi, we did see that bill go down to defeat in the Senate, in part because, well, mostly because Senators Manchin and Sinema declined to bust the filibuster to allow Democrats to pass it with the majority that they do have, adding Vice President Harris. And we did see that Kyrsten Sinema in the chamber that was receiving good wishes from Republicans who were lining up to congratulate her. Do you think there's going to be political fallout for her, for Manchin, for others who are really standing in the way of the voting rights legislation the president says is one of his top priorities?
There's still work to do, and she's still the 50th vote. And so anyone who decides that they're going to forever ostracize or not have a dialogue or a conversation with her isn't doing the people's work, because we've got to get things done. You can have a personal reaction to that, but your professional reaction should be, look, we are going to continue to try and get something done for the people of this country, especially for the working people of this country. And we need her to get this done because we haven't been very successful in peeling off Republicans. I do want to comment a little bit on what Sarah said because I think there's legitimacy to the concern about raising questions about legitimacy of this election. And I want to draw the parallel that we saw with vaccines when Democrats said, well, I wouldn't take a vaccine if it was approved by Biden. Well, you know, that this is not where we can be. We have to make sure that those institutions work for us and that we're getting the job done. And it really, I think, was an unfortunate moment.
It's so corrosive, the loss of trust in our democracy and these institutions. And people pay for it, you know, sometimes, as you point out, in the pandemic, maybe even with their lives. So, Sarah, I do want to switch to another subject. The president conceded that his other top priority, the Build Back Better plan, must now be broken up into chunks. You think he's going to have success there, spinning off some of the climate provisions or others?
Well, and what you want to see if you're the White House right now is a pivot away from what they've tried for the last 6 months, what has tanked his approval numbers among every group of voters out there. Because the #1 issue among black voters is the economy. Latino voters, the economy. Women, it's the economy. Stop trying to parse your voters and reach each one of them with a separate message, as I think he tried to do with that voting rights speech in Atlanta, which so deeply angered Republicans because he didn't even try to work with them and yet made it sound as if they were, again, Bull Connor standing there. And so, yeah, for the White House at this point, they need to pivot to smaller, achievable priorities that they can tout as successes, because constantly setting themselves up for failure, as they did with this voting legislation, it was bizarre politically, because all you're doing is frustrating your base and signaling to everyone else that you got no juice.
It is a hard spot that he is in, no question about it, and he has to reconfigure and rethink what he's doing, and that looks like what his assignment is for 2022. Senator Heitkamp, Sarah Isgur, thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.